Good morning. It's already been said a whole bunch, but I'll say it again. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, plenty of traveling to go around and plenty of family to see, plenty of food to eat, hopefully. I know that we had a good trip. We went to Alabama to visit my family, my side of the family, and it was hectic because, you know, when you shove 20 people in one house, that's just not meant to be. But the food was good and the naps were good, but we're happy to be back, of course. When you gather with your family, what are some things that you like to talk about? What do you guys talk about? I mean, my family really likes movies. We've watched all the superhero movies as long as we were growing up and watched tons of things and loved it a lot. There's no good superhero movies anymore, I feel like. But that's something we've always talked about in my family. And so I was thinking about some famous speeches that we see in like movies and things. And I was thinking of that speech in Braveheart, right before they go into battle. And he says, "They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom." And he gets everybody all like really riled up and ready to go beat somebody up, right? It's one of those real famous speeches. What's the other thing that we say not to talk about with family at Thanksgiving? Politics, right? There's some pretty good speeches in the course of history, politically. Got some inaugural speeches that we remember to this day. You've got, I think it was, I'm away from my notes, let me make sure. FDR said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, right? Or JFK, he said, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Martin Luther King Jr., famous speech, I have a dream. Some really good stuff, some really cool, famous speeches that we think about, we still quote to this day. Turn to Joshua chapter 24. This is Israel's version of one of these cool speeches. This is Israel's version of this great, goes down in history, to be remembered for all time, speech that impacts a nation, that may change the course of history for this one nation, maybe even plenty of other nations, as we'll see later throughout the Old Testament as well. Joshua chapter 24 is that speech for them. But what's interesting is, as we look through the story of Israel, they've come out of Egypt. God has led them through the wilderness to the promised land. Moses has died. Joshua's in charge. And Joshua takes up this mantle of being the leader of God's people, of Israel, with all the stress and the weight that has on it. And as they go through, and right before Joshua's death, he takes up this chance to speak with the children of Israel and to leave them with something that would impact them, that would last for generations, and we'd still be talking about it today. And here's what he said in Joshua 24, 11 through 15. "And you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho. The leaders of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I gave them into your hand." These are the words of God through Joshua. "I gave them into your hand. I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you, the two kings of the Amorites. It wasn't by your sword or your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities in which you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant." And here's Joshua's contribution. "Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it's evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Man, what a good speech. That'll get you pumped up, especially if you're dealing with this story of exiting and becoming a nation and having this identity of being God's people. This is something to get excited about. This is something to be remembered forever. Let's circle back to a question or a quote that Keaton mentioned at the beginning of this series in Family Matters. We're talking about why family matters. We've talked about parents and children and communication. And I think the first week he mentioned this quote: "Every family is heading somewhere. Few families are heading there on purpose." I thought that was a really good way to circle back around to the whole point that we're trying to get at with this series. Every family is heading somewhere. Few families are heading there on purpose. What is that purpose? What is that mission? What is your family's purpose? What is your family's mission? And I would say Joshua's answer to that would be to choose this day, today, November 26th, 2023, choose this day whom you will serve. And Joshua would say the mission of the family, to start off, to summarize, to think about the rest of this morning, the mission of the family is to serve the Lord. That's the mission of the family. That's what we're here for. We're going to look at how to do that a little bit this morning. You could also rephrase verse 14, the beginning of verse 14, to say, where he says, "Therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness." You could kind of rephrase that and understand that a little better by saying, serve the Lord as the one true motivation of your heart. And that's what we want to look at this morning. In the same way that the Israelites' story came to a head here, and they were faced with a decision as they entered the promised land and as they conquered nations and became God's people in Israel, they were faced with a choice that determined the rest of their life's direction. And I want to challenge you this morning with the same choice. I want to challenge you today to choose today who you're going to serve. And nobody else can make this commitment except you. For your family, and especially, to be a little more specific, especially you husbands and fathers. Choose today whom you'll serve. There's two ways I think that we can accomplish this, serving the Lord. And the first is to put away our idols. It's exactly the admonition that Joshua gives here as well, to put away our idols in Joshua 24. The idols in our homes are preventing us from serving the Lord. Whatever those are, the idols in our homes are preventing us from serving the Lord. Joshua mentions a couple of things here in chapter 24. He says, choose this day whom you'll serve. The gods that your fathers served in the region what does he say? The region beyond the river, the gods of the Amorites, basically the gods of your past. He says you have a choice now to choose whether or not you're going to serve the gods, the idols of your past, or the gods of the idols of the land in which you're coming into, so that beyond the river, or the people that you are taking over their land now, those two. We have the choice to serve the gods of our past or the gods of today, our culture. That may be past baggage that we have in our families. That may be things that we bring into our marriages, into our families. It may be baggage from before we were Christians. Maybe something that we've held on to, that we're struggling to let go. Whether that's a bad habit, whether that's a sin, or whether that's the way that we used to do things. Previous loyalties to things that take rank over God. Those things from our past have to go. We have to realize when we choose today to serve God, we're starting fresh. We're starting from a new perspective to choose God and to wipe everything out beyond that. As far as culture, we have our past idols that we struggle with, but today we have plenty of things that beat around us, plenty of things that pull for our attention, plenty of idols that are trying to take God's place as number one in our homes. And we have to fight against that. We have to fight those cultural pressures. I love what he says in verses 16 through 18, what the people say in verses 16 through 18. I love their response. They said, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It's the Lord our God who brought us up from Egypt, brought our fathers up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who did those great signs in our sight and preserved us in all the way that we went and among the people through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore, we will also serve the Lord. And I love what they say here in response. How could they not serve him? They're faced with a choice here, and they realize, rightfully, that they have a choice to serve the God that has done so much for them, or the statues, the lifeless forms that nothing can be attributed to in their whole life. If you also notice through verses 3 through 13, you'll see all the times that God reminds them of all the things that he's done for them. And, I'm sure he gets a little bit tired of doing this, right? All the times he has to remind the Israelites what he's done for us. We have the same problem. We forget what God has done for us, and we get lulled into thinking that we have some ability to make our lives great or to have the things that we have. But that's why, as with communion, as with all these other ways that we remember, those are to keep our mind on what God has truly done for us so that we can't forget that we rely on him. If you want help getting rid of your idols, try and compare, make a list. Think of all the things that God has done for you, that he has blessed you with, and then try to think of all the things that those idolatrous things in your life have done for you and where they've gotten you. And if you're honest and fair with that assessment, you'll realize God wins out every single time. And there's no choice. There's never a choice between who to serve, because it's obvious. It's obvious that we will serve the Lord because he's done so much for us. You want to know how much this matters? Or how much families matter? You can lose faith within a family within 3 generations based on the way that a family prioritizes faith. You can lose the faith of an entire family within 3 generations, depending on how that family prioritizes faith. Watch this progression. With the first generation, they experience a genuine faith. The first generation of these 4, it's real and it's personal. It's between them and God, and it's genuine. But then, if that's not passed on the same way, the second generation inherits this faith. They inherit it in a way that they kind of ride along. They ride along to worship, just come along, and it's never become a personal, genuine thing for this second generation. The third generation realizes that this has just become convenient. If this third generation, their parents were just riding along, then now this third generation views faith and views God as someone convenient when things are bad, when times are bad and they need a pick-me-up, or when they need help. It's convenient, and that's all it is. That's all faith is. And then by that fourth generation, faith has become a nuisance. It's something that the fourth generation doesn't understand why we're doing this. They become hostile to their parents when it comes to talking about religion, talking about their faith in God, when it comes to attending worship services. And they don't understand what the big deal is. And it's unfortunate how quickly this can happen. I mean, this can take within 80 years or so. And just like that, a generation that started with genuine, sincere, true faith in God, because of the way that is passed down or not passed down, that quickly, the faith of that family is gone. And I say that to help us realize how important this is, how true this is. As Hamilton says in the play, this is planting seeds in a garden you never get to see, right? This is choosing today to do something that's going to impact future generations for years and years, even if it's something we can't physically see today. But our actions will trickle down, and our choices will trickle down and either have a positive impact or be profoundly detrimental to the future generations of this world, of your family. In order to do this, in order to have this mindset shift, we have to change our thinking. Ashley has a really good point that she's been thinking about a lot lately, so I got to give her credit for this. But in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 4, it says, "When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory." And she tries to help me remember this a lot. What it says there, the first, before the comma, when Christ, who is your life, appears. This is how we have to truly view our lives and our faith. This is not a compartmentalized life that we live, where we put our school in one box and we put our faith in one box and we put our work in one box. Christ is our life, our whole life. And that's how we have to view it. That's how we can truly have a genuine personal faith in God, a relationship with God, and that's how that's going to be passed on and passed down. Because if we're confining our faith in God, our relationship, our service to God, to this building, that's how we have this 4-generation slide. And that's how that can go downhill very fast. We have to live in a way that accurately shows the world that Christ is our whole life, not just part of it. That's the shift. Then the second way that we can serve the Lord is to realize that God's way is the best way. This is something my mom has said for a while now, and it's a good way to remember it. God's way is the best way, and specifically when it comes to how our families operate. We've talked a lot about how to be better at communication, the responsibility of parents, and the duty of children. And if you look in Ephesians chapter 5 through 6, we see God tells us how our families should operate. He gives an admonition to each of the groups of people. He starts out with wives in Ephesians 5, verse 22. "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." So first, there's an admonition to wives. Again, we've already talked about parents and their duties and responsibilities within the family. But knowing that God's way is the best way is to trust this system. That wives submit to their husbands, as Christ did, or as the church does to Christ. This looks like selfless trust and dedication. This is not something to be done frivolously. This is done with utmost respect and trust in the husband. But then, it doesn't stop there, of course. The husbands have a responsibility as well. If you start in Ephesians 5:25, "Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body." This system of a family doesn't operate with just one person having a duty or responsibility. We all have a role to play in this. The husband's role is to be willing to lay down his life for his wife and for his whole family, because that's the example that Christ set for the church. That's where that comes from. This looks like action and taking responsibility. That's why I mentioned at the beginning that we all have to take up this mantle of serving the Lord, but especially husbands and fathers today. That's the responsibility. It's action and it's responsibility. If we're not even willing to go get our wives chocolate milk from the fridge, can we honestly say that we'd be willing to lay down our lives? That thought has hurt me so many times. And ladies, let's not weaponize that, please. I don't want too many complaints. But seriously, I have to remind myself of that. If our job as husbands is to lay down our life for our wives and our families, all the other little things that we're asked to do or that we have a responsibility to do become increasingly less of a difficulty, right? In the grand scheme of things. So children are next in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. This is actually because this is part of the law of Moses, and this is what was also being given around the time of Joshua to the children of Israel at this same time as the Joshua 24 speech. Children, honor your parents. This takes obedience and trust to honor our parents. That's a difficult thing. Sometimes we have a difficulty seeing why we should do certain things that our parents want us to do. We have to trust them to know that they have our best interests at heart. And again, like I said, all three of these groups of people, husbands, fathers, wives, mothers, and children, all have a different role to play in the way that God has intended our families to operate. And they only work if we all work together, right? They only work well if they all work together. How can a child be expected to obey her father if the father isn't willing to be an example of Christ to her? What does it say right after the admonition to the children? He comes back to the fathers in verse 4. Fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. You know, we can't just expect our children to just obey us every single time if we're not also taking up the responsibility of being an example of Christ. How can anybody expect a woman to submit to her husband if he isn't willing to lay down his life for her? On the flip side, if the husband is truly willing to lay down his life for his wife and all that that entails, find me one good woman who wouldn't follow him into any battle that they could face in life without hesitation. That's the power that us operating our families the way that God wants us to has. We're operating together, we're working together for our lives to be easier because God's way is the best way. It really is. Because God made us that way. We can trust the Creator who made us to know how we operate, to know how our brains work, and to know that we need each other. It's also why the church is called the family of God. It's supposed to operate to help each other. There's something interesting about this passage in Joshua chapter 24. Normally God does the choosing. So God chose Abraham, and he chose Noah, he chose David, he chose the apostles. And now he's chosen you. He's chosen me, he's chosen everyone in this room. The question is, will you choose him? Will you choose him? That's the question. That's the crux of the matter in Joshua chapter 24. You have a chance now to choose whether you'll serve the Lord. And remember, in this situation in Joshua chapter 24, this was a covenant renewal ceremony. This was a group of people that were already chosen by God and were already his people, but they had this opportunity to renew their covenant with him, to reaffirm their commitment, and to choose him again without any hesitation. And in this situation, Joshua didn't threaten or coerce them. He just asked a simple question. Who will you serve? You might say he pleaded. He pleaded with them. Who will you serve? And he also urged them not to commit in vain. Verses 19 through 20 of Joshua 24 says this. Joshua said to the people, "You're not able to serve the Lord. He's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He won't forgive your transgression and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good. This is Joshua's way of reminding them that this is a serious commitment. Don't choose serving God in vain, because if you choose him and turn your back on him again, the consequences will be dire. And God wants you. He wants you to come to him. This renewal, this rededication ceremony may not be the whole extent of what happened here at this scene. We don't know what all was entailed in this ceremony, but there may have been more associated with this. So as you picture today what your families may have done, ask yourself, what will a rededication look like for my family? What will a rededication to God, a rededication to serving the Lord look like for my family? I have a friend who preaches in Texas, actually, the preacher at a church of some of our visitors, and he tells a story about how he was preaching one time at a men's day. And he was preaching on this passage, especially to husbands and fathers, and the responsibility that they have there. And they left that men's day and went on their way. And then he was back in the area a while later, and a lady came up to him after he preached that day, and she just kept thanking him over and over, just kept thanking him. And he asked her, why are you thanking me? Why are you grateful? What is this about? And she said that her husband had been at that men's day, and that when he got home from that men's day, he went straight inside, and he took the sign off of the wall that says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," as many of us may have in this room. He took it off the wall, and he put it in the living room floor, and he gathered the whole family around. And he pointed at it, and he said, "We haven't been doing this. We haven't been doing this, and we're not going to put it back on the wall until we are." That's commitment. That's choosing today who you're going to serve. We can't be hanging this up on the wall if it's not a reality. We can't hang that up on our walls in our living rooms if we're still living with idols in our house, or we're bucking the system that God has created for us. Husbands and fathers, again, this takes responsibility and humility to do this. Mothers and wives, this takes support and dedication. If a change needs to be made today, do it. We have to do it today. We can't keep saying that we're going to change later, or we're going to change when it's easier, because it's never going to happen. We have to choose today. As Winnie the Pooh said one time, think it over, think it under. God is pleading for your family, and he's pleading for you. If you need to make a change in your personal life, salvation is free and open in Jesus Christ through baptism. It's always open to anyone. If a change needs to be made in your family, there's a church here that's ready and willing to wrap their arms around you, to love you and help support you in that change as we serve the Lord together. If you'll stand now as we sing.